Greetings, everyone. Scott Stevens here with a look at Scott's weather. And across the country, it is a beautiful, beautiful fall day. Rains still associated with beta have not been able to be let go of. This has been a slow mover from the Texas coastline all the way up through Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, so forth and so on. It's just been a very slow mover. And now we're just getting to the point where we're being able to entrain the westerly jet stream in there and then lift it on out. But it has been a very arduous process with a lot of water left behind. The only other place that is seeing any significant rains was first Oregon and Washington, and then far, far northwestern California. But now that has been restricted to just Washington state. And the good news is there's a little more out to sea. We'll look at that inbound frontal system and what it may leave behind in just a moment. But first, let's head over to Twitter and take a look at ultimately what could be a big event out in the Gulf of Alaska. Now, this isn't data. This is just what the models are predicting. And it's funny because that's what a lot of global warmings hang their hat on, is this is what the models are predicting. If you know from day to day, week to week, year after year, operational meteorology, as you look out the farther reaches of these models, you throw them away. Because so often what you were to hang your hat on, if I were to look at a model predicting something 15 days out, it may have a flavor of what's to show up, but the details will be nothing like what eventually arrives on your doorstep. So you can get a glimpse, but certainly it's not something to take to the horse track or to Vegas. It wouldn't happen. Nonetheless, the pattern is indicating that we would end up combining Dolphin, which is a typhoon in the far, far western Pacific, with a developing upper level low, and in that we could see the potential for a fairly healthy storm in the Gulf of Alaska, mainly, at least at this point in time, impacting the Aleutian chain. All right, disclosure of grand solar minimum is happening while media denies many of its effects, i.e. the cooling impact, because why would the sun have absolutely anything to do with our weather? We ask over and over and over again. This particular article saying a new 11-year solar cycle of the sun has begun. Scientists believe that the sun was at its weakest in the last 100 years or so. And it's interesting because global warmers begin tracking the temperature upwards since about 1880, maybe even 1900, looking at a 120-year cycle. And of course, it's going to indicate a warming period. Anyway, back the last 100 years known as a solar minimum. And 2020 marks the beginning of solar cycle 25 because we saw a new set of sunspots, both in the northern and southern hemisphere, of a different polarity. That is the sign. That's the flag going up saying the new cycle has begun. And that happened about 4 months ago. So sunspots are areas of strong magnetic forces on the surface of the sun, and they are occasionally as large as planets easily. And those appear because they are cooler. The sun, well, yes and no. The sun has had it is cooler, but that's not necessarily why. The sun has had no sunspots for around 71% of this year through September 21, compared to 77% of 2019, that is, according to NOAA. So what we're interesting is scientists are saying that the sun may be going through a long period of decreased activity known as the modern grand solar minimum. This would be from now through about 2053. And since solar activity peaked in 1958, that's 60 plus years ago. And now we're just entering this minimum. And that peak back in 58, it took an additional 40 years for temperatures to max out. And now we've had a plateau. And so we've been bouncing up and down around that plateau, creating year after year of warmer than normal temperatures or record heat. But as we look through the record, there's always this rapid peak, and then it's always sharp at the top and then a quick drop off. So we'll see if this sun, in combination with some of the volcanic activity that's beginning to manifest, does pull a veil over the planet and then usher in a bit of cooling. Something else that was applicable to the show we did on Another Perspective yesterday, Bloomberg publishing this opinion piece saying we may need climate lockdowns to halt climate change. So said the author of this opinion piece from Bloomberg. That might mean governments limiting private vehicle use, banning consumption of red meat, etc. We've got to do capitalism differently to avoid that. So this might be an interesting story to watch. You can find it on Bloomberg and then also on Market Watch, and probably at this point in time, numerous other places where it has shown up. So as we've talked about occasionally, also the National basically Environmental Prediction Center upgrading some of their models, and that is always needed. Models that are more accurate, that can be verified, something you really can't do with climate systems, but we can do on these shorter timescales of weather. And so we're beginning to see some of these new models that have just begun to be used, i.e., yesterday, getting them out of the public. And when they reach my data distribution sources, I will share them with you. All right, here comes the foliage. So says Weather Nation. The trees are beginning to change into colorful shades of yellow and orange. And this is La Crescent, Minnesota. And if you've taken any colors or videos of fall, tag us. That would be at Weather Nation or hashtag foliage. And you can see this is just in the beginning stages. There may be at 15, 20% color change. A little more aggressive here, says Reed Teamer. As we look into Colorado, where aspens tend to go gold, we don't have the red so often here, at least in the tall foliage down in the undercover. We do get some of those reds here. So we're kind of curious to see how beautiful this fall may be, but out west, it's kind of a different story without a lot of water. The fires have just ravaged the states out west, and without the water, then these plants simply go into preservation mode. They turn their colors early and drop the leaves and say, better luck next year. Where I am in Colorado, very, very few pine trees, whether they be ponderosa or pinyon or some of the other spruces, even developed pine cones because it was so dry this year. And that leaves the squirrels and the birds and those other small animals, which count on that abundance this time of year, because this is when they go storing things. If those nuts and kernels of calories aren't there, then it's going to be a very, very difficult winter for a lot of the wildlife out west, where that drought has just had a stranglehold on the environment for the better part of 10 months now. All right, for fire statistics, we've got 3 new ones, one contained, and we're just now crossing 7.1 million acres, but that is still shy of 2018's burn of 7.5 and still well shy of the 27 burn total of 8.44, and even shyer yet of what was burned in 15, which exceeded 9 million acres. We did get a new drought monitor released today, and the bigger changes was some great improvement in the mid-Texas through the hill country down into the Rio Grande Basin, but the addition of additional dry areas and the depth of the drought throughout the northeastern states, where a lot of the pasture and rangeland, not that there's a lot, but there's definitely some out there, and the stream flows throughout New England and the mid-Atlantic states just continues to be grossly deficient. And that also means that they had an earlier frost about 18 September, 27, 28, 29 degrees. Some spots were even a little bit cooler than that. So that frost halted a lot of the growth. And even if we were to get some rainfall, there may be enough of these plants that are just saying, I've also given up for the season, so that then those farmers are out there looking to bring in grasses and alfalfas and hays to sustain their flocks through their herds through the winter. So it's going to be kind of a tough go of it for those farmers in New England. And especially if we get a cold winter, that really is going to stress their livelihoods. The 16-day outlook, where we have reds and browns, indicate where the GFS, or the Global Forecast System, is anticipating less than normal rainfall. Only the Pac Northwest and then in around the Great Lakes states and maybe far southern Florida anticipating at or above normal precip. But the dryness will continue to be accentuated through the western states through at least the middle of October is what I'm seeing. At least no record heats. A few spots may show up today: Casper, Cheyenne, Denver, Grand Junction, Winslow, North Platte, Nebraska, Sheridan, Wyoming, all at or close to records today. Tomorrow, it's a very similar terrain, seeing those near record heats. Alamos at 81, which is a tire record high back in 2014. There's your list off to the side. And then the heat kind of goes on through Saturday. And then into Tuesday, it's kind of focused back down into the southwestern states as much much cooler weather begins to then appear through the eastern states, and we'll show you how that develops here. Yesterday, 108, the highest temperature of Brawley, California, and the 4 miles northwest of Grand Lake, Colorado, for one of the warmer readings, and still dealing with this pesky little beta, that Greek letter that just will not die. Still has a decent pressure, 1,007, which is okay, but it's enough. Movement now to the northeast as it accelerated about 16 miles per hour. And the National Hurricane Center has handed off responsibility for this to the Weather Prediction Center, or the WPC, as those in the field like to call it. And there's still just these thunderstorms that just will not let go as it crosses far northeastern Alabama, about headed into Chattanooga later tonight, Scottsboro, and then well north of Atlanta being that large city in the Peach State. But it's the West where we're seeing finally some rainfall. Finally, some rainfall. The oranges and yellows indicating that the atmosphere, at least above 12,000 feet, is dry. So there's a lot of dry air as we move into October, and it's typical. Most interesting, though, is that the monsoonal flow, we typically get the easterly winds coming off the Atlantic and through the Gulf of Mexico and then focused on these mountains in Mexico. And then we'll get some of that moisture leaking northward into the southwestern states. And that tap of rich tropical moisture is virtually gone. We're probably turning over these thunderstorms just because the vegetation has been so green. It's just been green enough that you throw a little late summer sunshine on that and you can get the thunderstorms to turn on over. Yeah, Karen, and that's probably going to be especially so this winter in a lot of locations, the Northeast, and then the entirety of the Rockies and the Southwest. If we want to maintain what I would probably argue are unnaturally or unsustainably high populations of these animals. We're already seeing massive bird die-offs, whether it's from early cold in the Rockies on that cold snap, which included snow on 7, 8, 9, 10 September, an absence of anything to eat in the West on their migratory paths. There's a lot of things that this year have conspired to take a toll on the aviary, on the birds, on the avian populations. They're just really struggling. So Beta needs a sine wave to run that right. Why not a little cosine just to get it so excited? Holy moly, I may never keep up with you. I know I'm just on here way too much. Maybe not. All right, back to the West. Look at all these clouds. Look at all this hanging down in here with Beta, all the way back into, say, Victoria, Corpus Christi, Texas, and just the clouds holding on. But that has really allowed for some very comfortable early fall-like weather. California is still burning. I'll get zoomed on in there. We'll head on out west. But first, all this low clouds and low cloud cover stuff, but still this little V shape right in through the V shape, and you can see these clouds just kind of boiling down here on the backside of this. So there's probably some technology involved in keeping this guy going the way it is. And then here's the onshore flow. Onshore, just bring in that Pacific moisture. Just let it wring itself out along the Cascades and in the coastal ranges. It's just so needed, even into the central Idaho mountains, where we can extract a little bit of water where it has been just so dry. And the vegetation really needs to have this water in place so it can go through the changing of the chemistry from active photosynthesis to then storing the sugars for spring and then just preparing the organism for winter. It's got to have that water so it can rest appropriately, so it can reset its systems. There was one I think it was 2014, where it was warm. Boulder, my parents are the family was in the Boise Valley, but the whole of the Rockies had an incredibly warm fall, even until like 6, 7, 8 November. And then it was 60 degrees colder. They went from 75 degrees, 20 degrees above normal to 20 degrees below normal and nearly zeros. And it just devastated walnut trees, orchards, just all of that fruit production just took a multi-year hit because of the sudden onset of the cold. And this is why these early, but a little strong, but not necessarily killing, but strong thrusts into cooler weather is just important to signal these trees on top of the reducing sunlight just to get ready for what's coming. All right, some of the precip in and around the Puget Sound area, 1.5 inches, 2 inches as we get in and around Olympia. Some of the mountains did a little bit better, 2+ inches. So it's a beginning. It's a beginning of the wet season where we can bring up the creek levels and kind of get those roots wet once again so these plants can anticipate the arrival of cooler weather. This was this morning. This was 8 o'clock Mountain Time. Find out where you are. I'll just reset it here to the current hour, and there we go. We've gone from 30s to 70s, 80s, and even 90s, and that's why we had signaled some of these record temperatures out here in the high plains where 80s and 90s were rather common, whereas down south, underneath that cloud cover from Beta, much more comfortable, humid, but still in the 60s. And there's the dew points at or above 60 degrees where we've got the green hashes. So a little bit of moisture trying to return northward, and that may spark another round of showers and thunder showers in and around Wisconsin and Michigan, where, let's go to the drought, where they've had some improvement of the drought, but there's still some dry spots. They're still trying to finish these crops. And it's easier for the crops to finish when the roots are wet. rather than when it's just dry. So there's the range with beta still pushing through the Carolinas, southern Virginias, and then now progressing, as we saw a little bit earlier, fairly quickly after the east, with even a little line of thunderstorms trying to get going in and around Birmingham. Look at those babies. But these creeks are now up and nice and high. All right, let's jump out of the national picture just for a review. Okay, this is good. This is good. It's been dry in the Dakotas and eastern Montana, so that's certainly welcome. And there's the continuation of the onshore flow through far northern Oregon and through Washington State. But as you can see, so much of it ends. So much of it is just wrung out by these showers trying to crest the Cascades. Comes out on the backside through Wenatchee, through Spokane, Kennewick, the Tri-Cities area. It's just dry, and it takes 100, 200 miles before the showers can get themselves reconstituted. Also, as they're then beginning to ascend the higher terrain in what is rather green northern Idaho. But the good thing is just this wide open Pacific. Just boom, just focus the hose of water at the Pac Northwest. But that's not going to last. Watch what happens. This ridge redevelops. It just redevelops. And this is that deep low we started the show off with, that 947 model low that we'll see whether it happens or not. But something's going to go on. Either way, the models have been crowing about this big ridge showing up off the West Coast. And what that does is then it displaces cold weather up in Canada and brings it south. So when you develop a deep low like this, and here we are on 1 October, the morning of the 1st of October, we end up with a deep low sitting over the Great Lakes states, and then another surge of cold air works its way southward and redevelops. So this may be because we're moving into a La Nina kind of situation where the blues, you kind of see the blues right in here. That's going to be at least a rain snow mix, certainly all snow. But this is another deep cold front passing all the way through Texas, surging into northern Mexico, all the way deep into the Gulf, and then snows, big snows for eastern Canada, through Quebec, through Ontario, along the Great Lakes states. We might even get enough snow and enough cold that we see some lake effect snows in the UP of Michigan, maybe even the northern part of the Lower Peninsula. That's a very, very real possibility. And then another blast of cold air as we get into and wind up that first week of October. And that may be just how the whole season goes, is that the West stays dry. That is typical La Nina. And then the East is chilly, unsettled, with kind of frequent snowfalls. So this is the latest run, and I'm just going to kind of accelerate this out so we can wind this up. But again, we're beginning to see snows. And once the snow flies, that often just it begins to stick on the ground, because we're going to be October here before a whole lot longer. Beta with a sine wave. That was kind of cute. Really, it was really kind of cute. All right, guys, that's it for Thursday. Got a great morning on Friday with the Coffee Break Show. I'll be on there, and interesting data coming in economically, and I'm sure Vic and I will discuss that, some of the scenarios that may be afoot. But otherwise, there's a lot of moving parts out there, and the weather, the food systems, the economics of what's happening, all of these are just part of a puzzle that day by day gets a little bit clearer. All right, have a great evening. Hey, that's that brand thing. I should have swapped that over to weather. All right, guys, catch you tomorrow. Have a great night. In the meantime, keep looking up.